Welcome everybody. Congratulations guys. We have made it to the flop, which is where the real excitement starts, right? So we are going to basically just do an overview of the mechanics of flop play. A lot of it is going to come down to c-betting, but before we reach that, let's just kind of take a peek at what drives flop strategy, things that you should be thinking about off table as you create your flop strategy, and what to think about in game. Best way to approach it is to just think about advantage. Who's ahead and who's behind. As you can imagine, most of the time the pre-flop raiser will be ahead since they started out with a stronger range than a defender. But that aside, let's get into the fun stuff, like what happens when that's not exactly the case, right? So there are a couple of different types of advantage that we're going to talk about. One is going to be a nut advantage. We're going to talk about a range advantage. And a little bit less important is going to be the advantage of future cards to come. But flop strategy, both optimal, that is Nash equilibria, as well as exploitative, is based on nut and range advantage. All right, so let's make sure we understand what those terms mean. Nut advantage refers to one range having the top end of the spectrum. Really strong hands that are almost always guaranteed to be best at showdown. By that I mean usually two pair or better. As close as you can get to 100% equity on the flop. Realistically, we're talking about like maybe 66% equity or better, all of those hands. Though the range that has more combos of those has the nut advantage. Or maybe another way to think of it is if like 50% of one range has all those great hands, and 20% of another range has all those great hands, the one with 50% is obviously going to have the nut advantage. All right, and strategically, why this is important, right? Because what's going to happen on the flop, we're going to have to decide whether to bet or check and how much to bet, right? Having nut advantage typically allows, theoretically, that range to bet larger. Why? Because it's value that always drives aggression, right? It's those nutted hands that are looking to get stacks in as efficiently as possible, and going with larger bet sizes is the most clear-cut path to that, right? And other than nut advantage, we have range advantage, sometimes also called an equity advantage. And this is simply just the range that has more equity. You know, who has more combos that are going to be better at showdown. That's basically all it is. Strategically, whoever has a range advantage typically is allowed to bet more often, right? Why? Because they're more likely to win, which goes back to value driving all of our aggressive actions, right? And some other things to consider when you are coming up with your flop strategy is how easy is it for my opponent to continue, right? Maybe you have an advantage and range advantage. Our opponent just has so few combos to really continue with. Sometimes maybe we'll consider whether we want to price them out or whether we want to have them catch up at least somewhat down the line, all right? And obviously, are turn and river cards more likely to improve our range or our opponents? All right. So let's take a look at things that you can do off the table to help you in game. Because plainly put, what we're really talking about here is hand reading, right? Who does the flop favor and who does it give a disadvantage to? When you are working with your software, here are some things to look out for, right? Just real quick to let you guys know, this is what I would call a range visualizer. This is called Flopzilla, and it's a little bit better than a plain equity calculator because it gives us all sorts of useful information on how ranges interact with flops, turns, and rivers. Price-wise, programs like this are really affordable, and as we covered, you want to have some sort of range visualizer to help with all of your off-table work. So we have pitted two ranges against each other. Here we have something that I pulled from GTO Solve, but the point is it's kind of just like a typical cutoff opening range. And here we have a big blind defense range that will defend when cutoff opens. And here we have a 6-4 deuce two-tone flop. All right. We can see that cutoff with 52% equity versus the 48 is the one with a range advantage here because their equity is higher, but they are at a nut disadvantage. All right. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's look at this. If you follow the mouse, the filters that we got going here pick off just 2 pair or better combos, right? And it looks like given what cutoff is opening here, there are no 2 pairs, there are no straights, but there are sets that are real strong, right? And those sets make up 2.4% of this range. But if we go over to big blind, who is at an equity disadvantage, when we look at these nutted combos, here we see that big blind actually has 4.25% of their range consisting of these nutted hands, right? And if I can, let me just zoom in here so we can check out this equity graph, because that's kind of where the magic happens. Now, in equity graph, you see these 2 lines, right? We read it from left to right, or you can think of it as just like the positive coordinates on a Cartesian plane. If you go up vertically, that's going to measure equity. So up top, we would have 100% equity. Down at the bottom, we would have 0% equity. And going from left to right, as we read, it just lists the combos of hands that we have, right? So basically just organizes our best hands down to our worst hands based on how much equity they have, all right? And the reason there are 2 lines is because it is comparing 2 ranges, the ones that we put in. And if we look at the highest equity hands, right, because these are closer to the top where 100 is, this is where we're going to have the nuts, right? And you can see the green line that's above goes with big blind. So that means that when we're looking at nutted hands, big blind has them all, with a 5-3 of diamonds obviously being the best one. All right. So when you're working off table, doing these kinds of comparisons, you're going to see equity graphs a lot, and you just want to be able to like look at one and quickly assess which range has an equity advantage and which range has a nut advantage, and doing it this way kind of like gives you the easiest visual clue as to what's going on. And if I click on random here to give us some random flops, we will see how it plays out on different possible flops that we'll face, right? So here we see that both players are sort of tied when it comes to nuts, but then we see that the in position player clearly has an equity advantage going down the line because their line is up top. Another random flop, this one looks like it favors in position player both in nut and equity. And what you want to do when you're working out your flop strategy is to just kind of, get 2 ranges going, and you can start creating random flops, right? And then you can start getting a sense as to which ones favor who and by how much. You can also start digging in and seeing how each range interacts with the flop and so forth. But for our purposes here, I think hopefully you understand what nut advantage means and what range advantage means. All right. Furthermore, also, if you are working with these tools, you can look at future cards that come. They will tell you how many cards increase equity and how many decrease equity. It's a less important data point in strategy, but something to consider and something that our poker tools give us. Having said that, hopefully you guys realize that I did not talk about the one obvious advantage that is ever present, and that is simply position. Out of position, players are always going to have a much harder time playing than in position players, regardless of nut and equity advantage. That is why a lot of professionals just prefer to check every single time there in the big blind and the flop comes out. There will be some flops that are advantageous to big blind's defense range, right? But that does not necessarily mean that you have to bet them. So optimally, there will be times when a range donks, but it's usually for a smaller size because they are out of position. And if you want to simplify your strategy as much as possible while you are still learning the game, you can definitely adopt a big blind 100% check regardless of the flop to the pre-flop raiser. It's a solid way to give yourself a solid game plan right from the get-go. So thanks for following along with us, and we will catch you in the next one, guys.
Download it for free at JurojinPoker.com.